Well, I guess I wanted to ask you, because you've done a lot of cultural studies. You've also thought a lot about these development issues. So when you look at kind of white communities or conservative communities in the United States, and then African American communities or immigrant communities, what are some of the things that jump out to you that are kind of these macro trends?
Well, I think for one, the trends of resentment on either side seems to be pretty strong, and I think that's a very challenging part of the conversation, because it makes it hard to have the conversation. If you start any conversation with resentment for the person you're conversing with, then there's a hindrance to the clarity with which you can come to truth. There's resentment of those who don't have, because they haven't had, either for, their own individual reasons or for systematic reasons or institutional reasons. And then there are those who have, who may have because people planned well and people organized well, but they have these things in lots of ways because other people were taken advantage of at some point. And the tricky part in the middle of all this is that there's not really a cause for guilt. There's not cause for guilt to be thrown at people who have, and there's not a cause for guilt for people to throw at those who don't have. There's no cause to guilt. You shouldn't feel guilty about being poor. You shouldn't feel guilty about being rich. I think guilt doesn't really serve anybody, actually. But being able to reconsider and reassess in your own mind and heart, is it just that I behave in this way? Period. Just apply that universally. Is it just that I live in this incredible condo, right? Or this incredible gated community, and this gated community didn't exist a year ago, and it actually was the projects, and it actually was a community of people who had learned how to share resources in such a way that they weren't as poor as they would have been on their own as they are now. Is it just that the crackheads who lived in that neighborhood now are just kind of right on the edges of my gate, and I actually now worry about my own prosperity and my kids and everything because the community that was here has just now been displaced? Those kinds of things are things that are tricky when it comes to poverty. How do I avoid blaming others, blaming myself, but rather taking this as an opportunity to figure out how can I reassess what has happened in my past? And this is what I'm doing presently. I am trying my best to reassess what I have learned through examples that may not have been the best examples, but I'm trying to learn from people coming from other cultures who, have learned things that make them, or at least prepare them for prosperity in different ways than I was, and trying to learn from that. The culture and the atmosphere of guilt and blame is really poisonous to the atmosphere that helps us progress. So I think that there's going to be a very strong need for very frank discussions among people of various cultures and diverse settings to talk about how we look at money, what assumptions do I make about responsibility, and how do I view the rich or the poor? Do I view them as haughty, careless, and, almost evil people? If I'm wealthy, do I view the poor as lazy and complacent and, and trying to mooch off of, the system and me and people who are hardworking Americans? Neither of those approaches seem to be productive because they're making judgments on something that they can't possibly know anything about.
Yep.
Truly wealthy people who've been wealthy for generations have no idea what it's like to be poor, period. There's no way that they can have any idea what it's like to, share the last couple of grains of corn. Mm-hmm. They don't know what that's about. That struggle is beyond them. And I think people who have been living in poverty will have a very hard time understanding what it means not to struggle in those ways, and the struggle being actually having the focus of your life being on something truly productive rather than just a mere accumulation of more, which becomes a bit of an appetite over time as wealth starts to amass. You're like, okay, well, how can I keep building? Because it becomes its own kind of game. So either side, there are positives and negatives.
vibrations which are not visible to the eye, but which are rapid enough to be sensed by the ear.